right, everybody, welcome into today's show. I think we have an absolutely fantastic one for you today. We have a lot of topics to go over, a lot of stories to cover, a lot of clips on a myriad of different topics. I'm going to have Sabby Sabs on as a guest today. We're going to talk a little bit about police brutality and systemic racism and the so-called justice system. And she's going to go into some of the challenges that Black activists and media personalities face. So should be an absolutely outstanding show today. I wanted to start by doing some shameless, real progressive plugs. We are very invested in this Medicare for All march coming up on July 24th. We have volunteers who are helping to organize these marches in various cities. We are going to be live streaming, cutting to some volunteers in various cities that are participating in the march. And we're trying to ensure that we can have a real progressive presence at some of the major cities. So in the spirit of trying to boost our ability to be as present as possible at what I consider to be a very important, activist and organizing opportunity, if you do happen to be able to donate, we would love to be able to be as robust in our education and our presence on the ground and things as possible. So you can go to realprogressives.org if you'd like to find our Patreon and any other information. There's also other great content out there, you guys. We have tons of other great shows, podcasts, articles, etc., that you can find at our website, realprogressives.org. First story I wanted to start with today. Florida State Board of Education has banned the teaching of critical race theory. And there's a number of angles to this. It's, first of all, I find it hilarious that the same political faction who constantly hand wrings about censorship and constantly cries that the left, opposes free speech and these kinds of things, then turns around and bans the teaching of a very valid social concept to students, right? The Dave Rubins of the world are constantly going on and on about, having this free, debate and open ideas and all this kind of nonsense. And it's clearly projection because they don't actually believe in that. They turn around and support banning the teaching of a valid and serious social concept like critical race theory. All that critical race theory really is, you guys, is an explanation of how on a macro level race interacts with society and how it, on a macro level impacts the ability of various communities to engage in society and find fulfillment in society. That it would be banned is quite revealing. And I think that this is one of those things that will be, really frowned upon in 50 or 100 years when we look back on this. And, that's brazen censorship. And it's obviously also quite racist, right? To disallow our children from learning about these things is brazenly bigoted and goes against all of the principles that the right claims to stand by, like free expression, free speech, etc. Right? Free exchange of ideas, except for the ones we don't like. It's not free speech. It's really not. So anyway, I think that's a critical story, and I think that's going to be a topic that we're going to get into a lot going forward because it seems to have kind of sparked a little bit of a culture war. And the response from the right to this, to teaching critical race theory, has been pretty extreme. So I think this is going to be a topic that lingers, and I'm hoping that we can do some education on that stuff as well. So going on to one of the big stories that is happening right now, the infrastructure negotiations. I even hesitate to call it negotiations because to me it's just ripe political theater. It's just, it's Manchin cosplaying bipartisan, as Brianna Joy Gray called it, and trying to kind of fetishize bipartisanship as a weapon to oppose a policy that he clearly does not support, that the corporate Democrats clearly do not support. And I mean, just in general, going to a robust place with this infrastructure bill, we would need something like 10 trillion to even just come up to par. Yet these negotiations are probably going to settle around the 1 trillion mark, and it'll be spaced out over 8 or 10 years. It's grossly inadequate, but it will be parroted by the mainstream and corporate media as bold and progressive. I can almost guarantee that. So I wanted to show you guys a clip here. It seems like progressives are starting to hesitate a little bit about supporting this particular proposal. And they're not nearly as strong as I would like them to be in their hesitation. When the establishment doesn't support a policy, they very openly say, we will not vote for it, period, end of story, that's it. So that progressives kind of view mildly opposing or coming out and saying, I might not support, or these kinds of things, as pushback is disappointing, because they should be a lot more strong in their pushback and in their opposition to such a weak, inadequate bill. But there is some pushback, and it's worth noting. So I'm going to show you guys first a clip here. This is Senator Markey on MSNBC, and we'll come back and discuss.
That the news they have a deal, and the White House coming out basically with a wait and see message. What's your understanding of where things stand?
Well, it sounds like to me that they have a package which is climate denial masquerading as bipartisanship. We can't have an infrastructure bill in 2021 that doesn't have climate at its center. And any other bill that we are going to consider that does not have aggressive solutions to the climate crisis will just have that response, which I've been giving, which is no climate, no deal. That's the only way in which we can respond. This bill has to meet the magnitude of the challenges which the climate crisis is presenting to our country and to the planet.
So
apologies, I was muted there. Markey is 100% correct. But it's disappointing that this is viewed as some form of strong, bold pushback. That's mild criticism. And that this is the most we can get from progressives is disappointing. This is an existential issue, you guys. Pick your top priority, issue, pick your top policy issue. It really doesn't matter if we don't have an inhabitable planet. Go forward a few decades. Does that policy position even matter if we don't have an inhabitable planet, right? This is an existential issue, and the progressives have not been nearly strong enough or bold enough in their opposition to the watering down of this bill. So that's just really, really unfortunate, because they're the only people that we have fighting this particular fight. I also want to show you guys a tweet here from AOC, who in a similar fashion sort of criticized, but mildly criticized this. So she reshares Martin Heinrich's post saying an infrastructure package that goes light on climate and clean energy should not count on every Democratic vote. That seems like, again, a very mild way of putting it. You should not count on every Democratic vote. Really, if we had a healthy Democratic Party, they wouldn't be able to count on any Democratic votes without going bold on climate change, right? So she retweets this and says, yep. She adds to the thread, Mitch McConnell and the Koch brothers are not worth setting the planet on fire for. I know some Dems may disagree with me, but that's my unpopular opinion of the day. Can't imagine that's an unpopular opinion, but maybe among the corporate and the establishment types, which AOC has to deal with on a regular basis, it is. Obviously, on the ground, pretty much regardless of your political views, you want to address the climate crisis, right? I mean, seriously, where are you on the political spectrum if you don't? You have to be pretty pure corporatist to think that it would be harmful to address the economic issues. And I just want to quickly say, you guys, this is one of the instances where I'm always quite confounded by the opposition arguments, because, like, let's even just suppose for a second that the climate scientists are totally wrong and that we're not in this existential place. Is the argument really that it would be bad to clean up the planet and have a healthier planet? Like, even if you don't believe the existential nature of the climate crisis, are you arguing it's negative to have a cleaner planet? What kind of a fucking position is that? To prioritize corporate profits over air quality and water quality and habitable land, and what kind of a position is that? It's not sensible in any way, shape, or form, even if you remove the strongest arguments that climate activists have on their side. So this is just such a no-brainer, and it's something that was so highlighted by the Biden administration during the campaign, by Joe Biden and his campaign, that this was, I even remember Noam Chomsky coming out and saying, we're going to get into a couple of great Chomsky clips today, by the way, but his argument was that we should vote for Biden, not because he thought Biden was sufficient. He thought Biden was quite inadequate, and he made that very clear. But his argument was that on this policy alone, on climate change alone, Trump was such a horrendous candidate that we needed to vote for his opponent, right? This was Chomsky's argument. And I think there's some validity to the way that he made that argument. I didn't personally vote for Joe Biden. I voted Green Party. But I think there's some validity to the argument he was making. The problem is now we see, and we could have predicted this too, that there's no follow through whatsoever. He is unwilling to take the political hits that would be required to actually force this through. And this all gets into, we're going to go into this stuff later too, you guys, where there's this dynamic in the Senate where bipartisanship is sort of, Manchin and Sinema and Tester, et cetera. Like these conservative Democrats will hide behind bipartisanship as a sort of an excuse to not go forward with the kinds of policies that we all desperately need, right? So this is Biden failing miserably on yet another campaign promise that is arguably the most important policy in the country right now, in the world right now. He also failed on healthcare. He claims he supports a public option, which I think would be a poison pill, but he claims he supports a public option. Did he take the opportunity of over 500,000 dead from a pandemic to give us healthcare reform? No, he didn't. Not even his milquetoast inadequate version of it. There's no effort whatsoever. He just leaves it by the wayside. Not even going to try. Same with $15 minimum wage. We can go on and on. Foreign policy hasn't hardly changed a bit. Like what changed? We have more kids at the border right now than we did under Trump. I mean, again, I'm not trying to do a false equivalency, you guys. Donald Trump's a fucking monster. He's the orange clown. He's horrendous. There's nothing about that man that's good. But did we really get any form of systemic, robust change? No, nothing close, nothing even close. So when Joe Biden promised big donors, nothing will fundamentally change. He was being honest when he made that promise. And this infrastructure negotiation is a continued example, another example of his lack of effort on these issues and his lack of desire to follow through on his promises that he made on the campaign. I like that AOC is tweeting this, but again, it's really hard to believe that people who kind of tweet mild stuff every now and again and then just fold when it comes to the action. It's really hard to believe that those people are actually going to stand up to this guy. Again, I don't mean to impugn the intentions of the squad or other progressives in Congress, but they've been weak as hell. They haven't done, they've had a number of opportunities where they had leverage. They had enough votes to change something, and they did fuck all about it. They did nothing. So what kind of confidence does that instill upon us voters when it comes to an issue like this that is existential? Like every month, every day, every week that passes, we are in a worse situation. We have a matter of years to turn this around, or we will be uninhabitable much sooner than I think most people realize, right? So for them not to use their leverage now is beyond egregious and beyond unacceptable and incredibly concerning for anyone who thinks that there's a prospect of these progressives fighting the good fight going forward. I hope like hell if we can get some more progressives in that will embolden these representatives. But again, there's just not a lot of evidence to go on here, you guys. They'll be progressive until they have to fight the people that we elected them to fight. And then it seems like they kind of just throw their hands up, or we get a mild tweet like this. It's disappointing. Or we get Ed Markey going on MSNBC and giving mild criticism instead of, again, guys, imagine if that was the Tea Party. If that was a Tea Party or on MSNBC or on Fox or pick your network that was complaining about the Republican Party's unwillingness to go as far as the voters wanted the Republican Party to go, can you even imagine how that interview would have gone? Seriously, they would have had to censor it. Okay, this is the difference between the Tea Partiers. This was Crystal and Sagar talked about this the other day. Sagar knows some people who organized for the Freedom Caucus. They laugh at the squad. They laugh at them. It's like, what are they doing in there? They're not using their leverage. They're not combating the establishment. They were elected to combat Nancy Pelosi. They instead cuddle up to her. It's disappointing, you guys. And I don't want to be sitting here giving you this commentary. I wish like hell I was sitting here telling you how great progressive representatives in Congress were. We would be in a much better position as a movement if I could sit here and tell you what a great bunch of Congress people we had. You know, that would be a better situation. This is not what I want to be doing, but this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So I would love to be wrong on this. I would love for this bill actually to be tanked by progressives who say, no, not until you do, you know, significantly more than you're doing here. Not until you meet a more adequate proposal, a more adequate funding number, et cetera, spending number, et cetera. If they don't tank this bill, it's another indication that they are not going to be the fighters that we hoped and thought they may be, right? So anyway, won't beat that one anymore. That's, you know, I think you guys all understand how desperate the situation is with climate change and with infrastructure. We have like a D-rated infrastructure in this country, which is just egregious. You know, we need better roads, better tunnels, better dams. We need better sewer systems, water systems, power grids, et cetera, et cetera. And we could use this kind of program to work towards a green energy grid, to work towards a more sustainable institutions in general, right? Anyway, just remarkably disappointing stuff there from the progressives in the House. So, and Ed Markey, quite frankly, and I haven't heard a word from Bernie on this, you know. So I just, again, it's disappointing, you guys, really, really disappointing. So I wanted to show you, next topic here is Kamala Harris, who basically tore into people who want to immigrate to the United States. It's disgusting the tone in which she takes here. She did a tour. I believe she went to Guatemala and Mexico and spoke about immigration. She earlier in Biden's presidency effectively blamed Latin American countries for United States foreign policy, which was also quite egregious and disgusting. She has taken a very conservative position here. And before I show you guys this clip, I just want to note, she is not appealing to even corporate Democrats with this kind of rhetoric. Even corporate Democrats supposedly support loosening up our immigration process and not making it so hard on people who are in desperate situations to come find a safe place to live, right? So she's taking a deeply unpopular position here that is far right wing. And acting as though that's some sort of appealing position to take, a reasonable position to take. It's not politically expedient. It's not based in reality. There's nothing about this that makes any sense outside of the Biden administration is going to be right wing on immigration. Okay, so we'll watch this clip and then come back and discuss.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back. So let's discourage our friends, our neighbors, our family members from embarking on what is otherwise an extremely dangerous journey.
So, pretty clear message there, right? Do not come. She says it twice. Do not come. What a tone to take with desperate people. People who, by the way, are desperate in large part because of the United States foreign policy, because of our military interventions and our coups, because of what the CIA does behind the scenes, because of our trade policy, because of sanctions, because of all this shit. They end up in a desperate situation. We corner these governments to disallow them from taking care of their people. And then we say, see how bad socialism is, but you better not come here. It's outrageous. It is outrageous. Name me a Latin American country we haven't done this in. It's outrageous. Repeatedly, right? Even to this day, we get involved in elections in Latin American countries. And then we turn around and we blame the desperate people for coming up here and seeking a better life. It's outrageous. And you know, Kamala there just overtly espousing a far right talking point, not even trying to dress it up. in any form of liberalism or progressivism. So just a continuation again, I mentioned earlier that we have not seen a very big improvement at the border under Biden. If anything, some aspects have gotten worse. And again, I'm not trying to do a false equivalency, you guys. There are nuanced differences between the policies, but a lot of Trump's policies have remained. And Biden said day one, he will undo every executive order that Trump did on immigration. He has not done that yet. And we are how many months into his presidency? Kamala Harris here going on tour to tell desperate people to fuck off. And this will be applauded by the Democrats, by the liberal crowd. You cannot make this up. You cannot make this up. If that was Mike Pence in Guatemala and Mexico telling people do not come, can you imagine the segments that we would see on MSNBC? Can you even imagine? And rightly so, by the way. But now that it's Biden, now that it's a Democrat, crickets. Absolute crickets, right? It's just unbelievable. And I have again here a tweet, and again from AOC, and again I will make the point that talk is talk, and sometimes it's all talk, right? But this is a valid criticism from AOC here. She retweets that clip I just showed you, and she says, "This is disappointing to see. First, seeking asylum at any U.S. border is a 100% legal method of arrival. Second, the U.S. spent decades contributing to regime change and destabilization in Latin America. We can't help set someone's house on fire and then blame them for fleeing." Again, really spot on commentary here. And I'm hopeful that that will lead to action that actually, puts pressure on the Biden administration to do the right thing here as late as they are. I again will point out, I know I said this last segment, that you guys, it's kind of a laugh what the progressives have done. To refuse, I don't want to open old wounds, but like to refuse when you have an opportunity to oust a woman in Nancy Pelosi, who is one of the most disliked figures in politics, and that's across party lines. She's not popular among Democrats, you guys, except for like very partisan Democrats. So for the lefties, the progressives in Congress, not to take the opportunity they have either to oust her or to use her election as leverage for policy concessions, right? Even if you're going to put her back in place, you could have at least gotten concessions out of her. And this is what the force the vote thing was about, saying if you're going to put Nancy back in the speakership, at least force her to do a vote on Medicare for all on the floor, force a floor vote. Okay. And again, I don't mean to open what would clearly some wounds among lefties, but it's this continuation of that where we get rhetoric and we don't get pushback. We don't get the squad coming out 4, 5, 6 of them at a time saying, I will not vote for that. It would only take one senator, Markey or Bernie or any of these, Merkley, any of this, the progressives, the so-called progressives, right? How about the 2 new Democrats in Georgia? Either of you guys going to step up on climate change? No, of course not. It would take one, you guys, one senator that says, look, I'm not voting for this until you put climate change stuff in there, until you make it robust. Not doing it. But they won't do that. They'll give mild criticism of it as though that's moving the needle when Biden full well knows that Ed Markey is gonna vote for this no matter what. Right? I'm like 99% sure that Ed Markey will not hold his vote on this. And this is one of the biggest differences between progressives as a bloc and the corporate side as a bloc, or the Republicans as a bloc, or the Freedom Caucus as a bloc, or any other political faction that has had power in recent history. They will all use their leverage. Okay, the Tea Party freaking hated John Boehner and Paul Ryan, and like they were not friends or allies. They were outright enemies, openly, publicly enemies. The squad will not take that approach with Nancy Pelosi. They will not create that framing. And that is the framing that would be successful, because nobody likes Nancy Pelosi. Everybody's going to be on your side of that except for the most partisan Democrats. So it's again disappointing to not have much action in response to what is an egregious immigration policy that the Biden administration has continued, not undoing a lot of the horrendous things that we all hated to see Trump do, right? And again, the media coverage of this is incredibly biased and incredibly revealing and transparent. That there was, rightly so, there was outrage when Trump was executing these policies, when Trump was blaming desperate people for the situation that the United States has put them in. There was outrage about that, and rightly so. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now you have to defend Biden, right? And that's what the legacy press has found themselves doing repeatedly. So another huge story here, you guys. This one is not so surprising. I find myself a lot of times saying that a story is kind of viscerally stunning or emotionally stunning, but not intellectually surprising. Like if you follow politics, you're not going to be surprised by this at all. But it is viscerally stunning to see the kinds of numbers that we are talking about here. I'm sure many of you saw that there was a release from a report here from ProPublica about how effectively billionaires are able to dodge taxes. So read a little bit here from ProPublica. The secret IRS files trove of never-before-seen records reveal how the wealthiest avoid income tax. In 2007, Jeff Bezos, then a multi-billionaire and now the world's richest man, did not pay a penny in federal income taxes. He achieved the feat again in 2011. In 2018, Tesla founder Elon Musk, the second richest person in the world, also paid no federal income taxes. Michael Bloomberg managed to do the same in recent years. Billionaire investor Carl Icahn, or I'm sure I'm butchering that name, did it twice. George Soros paid no federal income tax 3 years in a row. ProPublica has obtained a vast trove of Internal Revenue Service data on the tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people, covering more than 15 years. The data provides an unprecedented look into the financial lives of America's titans, including Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Rupert Murdoch, and Mark Zuckerberg. Shows not just their income and taxes, but also their investments, stock trades, gambling, winnings, and even the results of audits. Taken together, it demolishes the cornerstone myth of the American tax system that everyone pays their fair share and the richest Americans pay the most. The IRS records show that the wealthiest can perfectly legally pay income taxes that are only a tiny fraction of the hundreds of millions, if not billions, their fortunes grow each year. And again, you guys, this is not a stunning story. This is something that we've known for decades, that the tax rate on the books, it's especially as you get towards the top, is not the tax rate being paid by the people who fall into that particular bracket. This has been known for a very long time. People like to cite in the 60s, we had the golden economic era, and you had a top marginal tax rate up in the 90%, up over 90. That was not the actual rate that was being paid, right? So they've long been able to dodge taxes and get away with this. I also want to be clear, everyone, I'm a modern monetary theory proponent, and I'm sure most of the viewers of this show are as well, that those taxes are not paying for any federal programs. They're not revenue. What they are is a way to ensure that we have an equitable society. They are a way to keep rapacious and dangerous behavior in check, and that includes the kind of financial maneuverings that the rich engage in, the kind of corruption that they engage in. We want to keep that in check so we can tax them, right? The taxes maintain and create the demand for the currency in the first place from inception. Many reasons to tax the rich. I wholeheartedly support taxing the rich. I wholeheartedly support many forms of wealth redistribution. I just want to be clear that those taxes, we're not like not paying for programs because Bill Gates is dodging taxes or because Zuckerberg's dodging taxes, right? What it is they are maintaining their stranglehold over the institutions in our society by staying as rich as they are. So we want to tax them to literally just remove their ability to engage in corruption and control our institutions and continue to leech off of our society, right? And steal from workers effectively. We want to tax them to cut into their overall power over our lives. And they end up dodging to this extent. And you guys, a number of these billionaires paid zero federal income tax numerous years. A lot of them paid what looked like a high number, but it comes out to like 1 or 2% of what they made that year, right? Jeff Bezos is a fantastic example of this. He paid millions and millions last year in federal taxes. Sounds like a huge amount to you or I, but when you look at what he actually made during the pandemic, comes into clear picture that he paid about 1.5% of his income in taxes. That is way below what your average middle class person pays in taxes, let alone what the top marginal tax rate is supposed to be. So they're getting away with absolute murder here. You know, we know that a number of leaks have revealed some of the ways that they do this. The Panama Papers, I don't know how many of you remember the Panama Papers that got almost no play in the mainstream media, but revealed how The wealthy are able to hide their money in tax havens overseas and things like that. How they engage in financial maneuvering to avoid paying taxes and hold on to that power and that wealth that they have. So it's one of those stories that's not terribly surprising to most lefties and economically informed voters, but it is very much worth pointing out. And this was fantastic work from ProPublica to get their hands on these records and dive in the manner in which they did. So huge shout out to them for that. Also want to talk about another big story this week. I'm sure many of you saw that Ilhan Omar caught some, in my view, unwarranted criticism from the establishment for her truth-telling about our foreign policy. She compared the United States and Hamas and Israel. She basically said that all of these groups commit atrocities. Okay, this was in a tweet where she also was sharing some questioning that she was she was partaking in, right? She was questioning Anthony Blinken. I always say Anthony. He has no H. I don't know how many of you know Anthony Blinken. She was questioning, and so she shared this clip. And in the tweet, she compared the United States to Hamas and to Israel and what we do in Afghanistan, etc. And that was, you can't do that, you guys. I've said before, the quickest way to get yourself canceled in this country is to criticize Israel. That's the quickest way to do it. So I'm going to show you guys an article here. This is in The Intercept, going into some of the details. It's by John Schwarz. Political system unites to condemn Ilhan Omar for telling the truth. The frenzied attacks by Republicans and Democrats on the Minnesota representative are about maintaining absolute impunity for the U.S. and Israel. This past week's feeding frenzy on Minnesota Democrat Representative Ilhan Omar, including by the Democratic leadership of the House of Representatives, should cause despair among anyone holding on to a faint hope that powerful Americans can discuss the world without engaging in childish lies. That's a great line, you guys. It's childish lies. To accuse her of anti-Semitism, it's petulant, it's deflectory, it's detached from reality, it's childish. It all began with an hours-long hearing Monday by the House Foreign Affairs Committee with the snoozy title State Department Foreign Policy Strategy and Fiscal 2022 Budget Request. Secretary of State Antony Blinken took queries from committee members, including Omar. Omar had a serious, rational question for Blinken about the significance of America's policy toward the International Criminal Court at The Hague. You opposed the court's investigation in both Palestine and in Afghanistan, she noted. In both of these cases, if domestic courts can't or won't pursue justice and we oppose the ICC, where do we think victims are supposed to go for justice, and what justice mechanisms do you support for them? So I'm going to show you guys that clip in just a second here. I just want to note that Blinken does not answer her question. She's saying, where is the avenue that victims of human rights abuses in Palestine can go to if we're not going to support the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and we're going to take a stance that opposes their ability to find justice elsewhere, right? So this is a great line of questioning from Ilhan Omar. She's basically saying, you claim to support Palestinian rights, or at least basic human rights for everybody involved in the conflict, right? The State Department is very particular not to mention Palestinian rights or say things like Palestine has a right to defend themselves. They will avoid those kind of statements, but they claim that they hate and find any death or any injury of anyone is problematic to them. That's the line they try to hold, right? Even though they support and fund the death and the harm being brought upon Palestinians, even though it's our weapons that are being used to cause said death and harm. They still try to hold this position that, no, we don't want Palestinian kids to die, right? So Omar here saying, well, okay, if that's your position, where are they supposed to go for justice? And Blinken refuses to answer the question entirely. So we're going to watch this clip, come back, and discuss.
I know you oppose the court's investigation in both Palestine and in Afghanistan. I haven't seen any evidence in either cases that domestic courts both can and will prosecute alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I would emphasize that in Israel and Palestine, this includes crimes committed by both the Israeli security forces and Hamas. In Afghanistan, it includes crimes committed by the Afghan national government and the Taliban. So in both of these cases, if domestic courts can't or won't pursue justice, and we oppose the ICC, where do we think the victims of these supposed crimes can go for justice? In both of these cases, if domestic courts can't or won't pursue justice, and we oppose the ICC, where do we think victims are supposed to go for justice? And what justice mechanisms do you support for them?
Thank you. First, let me just say at the outset that it is impossible not to be profoundly moved by not just the loss of life in the recent violence and conflict, but especially the children whose lives were lost. And we all have a tendency to throw statistics and numbers out there, but we were talking about boys and girls, Israelis and Palestinians, as well as men and women. And I think none of us, from whatever perspective we come, can lose sight of that. So that's one thing that's very important. Look, you know our views on the ICC and its jurisdiction. We continue to believe that absent a Security Council referral or absent the request by the state itself, that's not appropriate. I continue to believe that whether it is the United States or Israel, both of us have the means.
Mr. Secretary, I do understand that point. I'm asking what mechanisms you think is available to them.
I believe that we have, whether it's the United States or Israel, we both have the mechanisms to make sure that there is accountability in any situations where there are concerns about the use of force and human rights, et cetera. I believe that both of our democracies have that capacity, and we've demonstrated it, and we'll need to continue to demonstrate it going forward.
And in the case of Afghanistan?
With regard to Afghanistan, if it's our objection, as you know, was to the assertion of jurisdiction over the United States in the absence of a Security Council referral. And I believe that we have the means, if there are any cases to be brought, to adjudicate them and to find justice.
So if you wanted to find a bigger word salad of cliches and platitudes and vapid nonsense, I think you might have to go to Tom Perez. That was a whole lot of words to say absolutely nothing about what she was actually asking. The United States has tried to walk this line where we claim that we are not, we claim that we want to defend Israel's right to exist, but that we are not in favor of the Palestinian death that we are contributing to. Blinken there completely refusing to address the United States' role in obstructing justice here. The United States has veto power over a number of international avenues by which justice could be had by victims of human rights abuses, and we continually use that veto power to defend Israel's crimes. We continually endorse their ethnic cleansing, continually provide weapons and funding for their ethnic cleansing, and we never, ever condition that aid or condition those weapons on their not engaging in these war crimes. So that was a whole lot of nothingness from Antony Blinken, which is about what you would expect from the State Department on this issue. Omar really did a great job there because she's basically saying, I'm taking your position at face value and you still can't answer my question. Even if I grant you the obviously incorrect and bullshit argument that you continually make, even if I grant you that, you still can't answer my question about where people are supposed to go when they need justice for human rights abuses, right? So Ilhan Omar is, as far as members of Congress go, about as good as they get, in my opinion. She is, again, I sometimes have complaints about the Squad as a bloc and about these progressives as a bloc not using their leverage and not kind of, working together to create that leverage. But Ilhan Omar is one of the most outspoken and one of the most bold and one of the most unwilling to fold on these issues. She was also absolutely eviscerated for standing up for Palestinian rights just maybe a year or two ago. Timeline's a little foggy, but she got absolutely eviscerated. Congress passed like a resolution that was basically condemning her for anti-Semitism. Pelosi went after her personally. It was, and all she had basically said is Israel's committing crimes and we should fight for Palestinian rights. They have a right to defend themselves. For that, you get eviscerated in this country. You get canceled, or trying to teach critical race theory, as we found out in Florida. I have a couple clips from one of my favorite intellectuals of all time, Noam Chomsky. Noam, I just saw this clip this week. It's one of my very favorites. The second one that I'm going to show you guys here, it's him eviscerating every post-World War II president, which I think is fantastic. But first, I wanted to show you a short clip of Noam here talking about the hypocrisy of our foreign policy and how if you were to flip the situation around, the United States would respond to itself with extreme aggression, right? If someone treated us how we treat others, we would respond to that with extreme aggression. Yet if someone else responds to us with aggression, how do we treat that, right? So he kind of points out the hypocrisy here in a short clip, and then I want to show you guys a longer clip of him going through each president and the war crimes that they committed.
If you take a poll among U.S. intellectuals, support for bombing Afghanistan is just overwhelming. How many of them think that you should bomb Washington because of the U.S. war against Nicaragua, let's say, or Cuba, or Turkey, or anyone else? If anyone were to suggest this, they'd be considered insane. But why? I mean, if one is right, why is the other wrong? When you try to get someone to talk about this question, they just will try. They can't comprehend what your question is, because you cannot comprehend that we should apply to ourselves the standards you apply to others. That is incomprehensible. Now, there couldn't be a moral principle more elementary. I mean, all I have to do is read George Bush's favorite philosopher. There's a definition, famous definition in the Gospels of the hypocrite. The hypocrite is the person who refuses to apply to himself the standards he applies to others. By that standard, just, the entire commentary and discussion of the war, so-called war on terror, is pure hypocrisy, virtually without exception. Can anybody understand that? No, can't understand it.
So, excellent point there. I've heard it referred to as the Chomsky rule before. If we're talking about foreign policy, the Chomsky rule is flip the players, and if your opinion is different, then you're not holding a principled take, right? If you're, that means you're being nationalist and you're treating your country as different from others, right? So I love that rule in general when we're discussing foreign policy. This is a longer clip, you guys. I wanted to show you this whole thing. This is Chomsky going into each president that he has long said, if you enforce Nuremberg, that every post-World War II president belongs at the Hague. And this is him being challenged on that at Stony Brook University in an interview a while back. He does not get into the most recent presidents simply because this interview was 15 or 20 years old. But this was a fantastic bit from Chomsky that I wanted to bring you all so that we have an in-depth understanding of just how criminal the United States foreign policy is. So enjoy this clip. Okay. I am seeing a lot of you say that there is no sound there. So I will try to get that clip right for maybe next stream. I'm confused why that wasn't playing. I could hear it just fine. But the point basically being, Chomsky was challenged on his position that every post-World War II president belongs at the head. And he starts with Eisenhower and he goes all the way through Bush Jr. and points out the various crimes around the world that all these presidents have engaged in. And even like for example, I've long thought, some of you may disagree with this, I've long thought that Jimmy Carter was the last president that I think was even a halfway decent human being. Even Jimmy Carter was guilty of some extraordinary war crimes. So you know, people like to tout, some progressives like to tout Kennedy. I think he's kind of been had his mask taken off among the left in the modern era, but some progressives still like to tout Kennedy. Kennedy was one of the worst. What he did in Vietnam and in South China, and you know, Kennedy was awful on these issues. So it's the point that I wanted to drive in here, and I will try to get that clip for a future stream because it's a really good bit that he goes into, is you can elect, like I think even if we elected Bernie, we might have seen some like marginal improvements to our foreign policy, but I think the machine is so strong that to expect like transformational change on foreign policy, regardless of which president you're putting in place, is probably unrealistic. The military-industrial complex is just, I can't even describe how powerful it is, right? And that it's all interwoven with the intelligence community and big tech and all of these kinds of the power structure there, the institutional power that is held is unbelievable. And I don't know how much even a president can do to cut into that in a term or two. Do you see what I'm saying? So the point that Chomsky's making is like the United States, one of my favorite phrases, we are the bad guys. Okay. That's not to say that all of our enemies are good. Of course not. But we are the bad guys. If you were to look at the world as a whole and try to figure out like which country has done the most harm, has inflicted the most death and suffering upon others around the world, it would be us by an extraordinarily wide margin. Extraordinarily wide margin. You could maybe say like the UK in previous eras when they were kind of the colonizers, but in the modern era, the United States has done more to influence the state of the world than any other country. We have more of a stranglehold over trade and foreign policy and all this kind of stuff. I think Israel is a great example of this, you guys. We talk a lot about the direct ways in which the United States influences Israel. But it's also true that Israel has a number of allies in the region that would not be their allies if it weren't for those countries being scared to death of the United States. So you have a bunch of like Arab countries that are allied with Israel because they don't want to piss us off. Our stranglehold over other countries' foreign policies is incredible. Over other countries' trade policies is incredible. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean incredible, and it's proportional. You know what I mean? So when you look at it that way, we're kind of allowing for the suffering and death that goes on a daily basis around the world because of the imperial powers. This is the history of our country is trying to be superior and trying to win against other countries instead of trying to lift the entire world up or be a positive force on impoverished countries and impoverished communities around the world. We compete with them instead of helping them, and you know, take their resources and commit coups against them and use our intelligence to affect their elections and, you know, I mean, all sorts of stuff, manipulating markets. You know, look what we did to Venezuela with the oil market, us and the Saudis, right? What we do is always it's always selfish. It's always rapacious. It's always self-interested. And our foreign policy always follows along those lines. There's also, and one of the quickest ways to reveal this is the number of brazen and direct contradictions and hypocrisies that exist within our foreign policy. We claim that we want to be fighting Islamic extremism, just to pick one example. We're fighting the war on terror, right? Well, then why are we allied with Saudi Arabia? I know Joe's like rhetorically, been harsher on them than previous presidents, but we're still like, we just gave the UAE a couple months back. We gave them billions of dollars in weapons. They're using that in the genocide that's going on in Yemen, right? That's the Saudi genocide. We continue to participate in these kinds of interventions that the Saudis engage in. Saudi Arabia is one of the very least, like if we were to rank countries in terms of how respectable they are on human rights issues, they'd be damn near the bottom. They're an extremist Sunni theocracy. And if you are, for example, gay or atheist or a political dissident, you are killed. Sometimes for sport, like in front of the public. It's disgusting. It's horrendous. The way that women are treated in Saudi Arabia. Disgusting, horrendous, dehumanizing. They're not treated as citizens. They're treated as sub-citizens. They're lesser than, right? And so for us to constantly espouse that we are on the side of human rights and civil rights, and that we are trying to bring the rest of the world to a better place on human rights and on civil rights, and then turn around and ally ourselves with the Saudis. That's just one example. We're allied with like 70 or 80% of the world's dictatorships, you guys. So we don't walk the walk, and that's the quickest way to reveal the actual nature and intention of our foreign policy, which is very clearly to compete with the rest of the world, to beat the rest of the world. I like the theory that if there are extraterrestrials out there, I know this is a hot topic with all the UFO stuff the Pentagon's been putting out as a distraction, but it's overwhelmingly likely from a scientific perspective that there are other societies out there in the universe, probably millions or billions of them out there in the universe. So the question comes up, like if some of them are substantially more advanced technologically than we are, why haven't we seen them, right? Well, one of the answers, it's all speculation, but one of the proposed answers is that we are still so infantile, that we are still fighting with each other, that they might fly by and go, oh, they're dropping bombs on each other. They're not worth our time. They're not intelligent. That's just an unintelligent animal. So I think that there's some potential validity to that a species as advanced as one would have to be to travel the distances required to find us and be around us would likely be quite turned off by how we have structured our society and by how we engage with each other. That we are still, that we might destroy our planet with nukes, that we can't even get climate change in order, that we're still so selfish and rapacious as to prioritize capital over our survival. These kinds of things would be extraordinary turnoffs to any advanced civilization that was interested in communicating with us, right? So that's a little bit of a tangent, but the point is that the United States policy on these things puts the world in a place where we're stuck. We have such a stranglehold on foreign policy the world round and on trade policy the world round that we end up sort of freezing ourselves in place by having the policy that we have as a species, is what I mean. The United States kind of disallows us from making the kinds of improvements and having the kinds of growth that we would need to advance as a species. And that's just really too bad. And Chomsky points it out brilliantly. And, again, from Eisenhower to Bush Jr., and obviously Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, all participating in war crimes, probably even more so than previous presidents. In fact, when we got to Bush Jr., Chomsky kind of just said, and he said this about Nixon too, he just kind of said, I don't think I need to comment on that. I think you guys all know the crimes committed by certain presidents, right? Bush's invasion of Iraq was a brazen war crime, brazen. And the actions we took during the invasion of Iraq and since the invasion of Iraq, brazen war crimes, like not even borderline, not even questionable. Obama continues that policy, expands the wars from 2 to 7, at least 7, quote unquote, conflicts, right? The Libya disaster, brazen war crime, right? All these coups that Honduras, and he escalates in Iraq and Afghanistan. He begins our involvement in the Saudis' genocide in Yemen, just over and over again. Syria, just repeatedly, we continue to take the same stance that has failed miserably, as though it's a reasonable position. And anytime that a U.S. president even tries to talk like they're going to back up our foreign policy, like they're going to pull some troops out or something, you get this outcry from across the political spectrum, even supposed liberals and progressives that say, well, no, you can't do that because it'll destabilize the region. Well, then when can we pull out then? And they never have an answer for that. They advocate for this endless, undefined period of time that we're just going to continue to destabilize the region with our presence. This is just true across the board, and doesn't get enough play, in my opinion, because voters don't really care about foreign policy. It doesn't hit their pocketbooks, right? It doesn't. Their bank account isn't affected by it. Their day-to-day life is not affected by it. Their employment situation, their family, not really affected by it in most cases, outside, of course, of the soldiers that end up with PTSD and these kinds of things, or people who have relatives in these countries, like Rashida Tlaib in Palestine, these kinds of things. But unless you have a relative that's actually been victimized by these conflicts, this isn't affecting your day-to-day life. And unfortunately, that means that it gets deprioritized, even though it affects billions of people all over the world, you guys, and not just in direct ways. Our foreign policy also leads to poverty and suffering and, destabilization of areas where we are not militarily present. So, again, I think this is a critical topic. I really hope I can get you guys that Chomsky video. He goes into it in extreme detail. I cannot even remember all of the things that he brings up, and I've seen this video maybe 3 or 4 times at this point. So just a fantastic bit there from Chomsky that I hope I can show you guys at some point in the near future. So one more story here before we get to today's guest. Some of you may know Art Laffer. Art Laffer was one of Trump's top economists, along with Larry Kudlow and a couple of others. But Art Laffer is a laugh. His name is fitting. Art Laffer has absolutely no idea what he is talking about when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So we'll watch a quick Art Laffer clip here and then discuss.
Okay, Austin wants to talk about the current McDonald's CEO, Kemczynski. He's noting that artificial intelligence technology has 85% accuracy with filling orders, with workers having to step in for approximately 1 in 5 orders. It's going to be a big leap, he says, to go from 10 restaurants to 14,000 restaurants. But there is no doubt they are working in that direction, Art.
Yeah, for those people, Sandra, who are coming into the labor force brand fresh, not old-timers who've been around for a while, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, those with less education, young people who haven't had the job experience, these people aren't worth $15 an hour in most cases. And so, therefore, when you have a $15 an hour minimum wage, they don't get that first job. They don't get the requisite skills to earn above the minimum wage. And after a few years, they become unemployable. And after becoming unemployable, they become hostile. And that what you'll find happening is this technology has created an underclass of people who are really just bid out of the labor market and will remain out of the labor market for most of their lives. And this, I think, is just a tragedy. I love the technology, but the technology is replacing the jobs for these people. And it's a killer. It's a killer for just the people who need the help the most.
So Art Laffer, they're essentially saying that young people, minorities, people with little job experience are not worth a living wage. I mean, how brazen can you possibly be? How ridiculous can you be? Again, the Laffer last name is all too fitting in this particular case. Art, espousing this totally insane far-right philosophy that is not at all attached to reality. If you go back to the 70s, for example, and you adjust for inflation or for production, the minimum wage should really be like in the mid-20s. So 15 is already a compromised position for the poor and working class to be demanding, and that we have to scrap so hard for it is indicative of how, how off the rails our economic policy has gone over the past 50 years or so. So I am happy to bring in my guest today. Sabrina Salvati is better known as Sabby Sabs. She's a commentator, a podcaster, leftist. She has recently joined Fred Hampton Leftist. So congratulations to Sabrina for that. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Hi, Luke. Thanks so much for having me.
So if you wanted to start, you did an interview with Nico House recently. I think it was a few days ago. And you guys started that discussion by talking about some of the, like, kind of the added layer of challenges and obstacles for Black activists and Black commentators, sort of how it's harder to maybe build an audience or to network with some of the other leftist independent content creators. I was hoping you could just kind of expand on that and talk a little bit about how even in 2021, we are still, behind on some of these issues.
Absolutely. So a big part of it is the algorithm on YouTube, which we don't have control over. None of us do. But there are some things that we have noticed, like us as Black leftist commentators. I talked about this with Kamali and Nick and Unapologetic as well on a panel that we did. And one of the things that we've noticed is that some of the issues that we discuss, such as policing, such as just Black issues, reparations, a lot of times when we post those videos, they're automatically demonetized. I've experienced that myself. And that puts us further down the algorithm. So that's a big part of it. But the other part of it is just that in independent media, as Black leftist commentators, we do not get a lot of the platforming that white leftist commentators get. And what we've noticed is that some of the Black leftist commentators that do get that type of platforming are people that have large platforms already, right? Or people who are public figures, or people who are celebrities. So those are people that 9 times out of 10, they're going to bring them on because they already have a large platform. That being said, I've also seen them bring on white leftist commentators that don't have a large platform. So what is it really about? Like, what's really the problem there, right? So I think a big part of it is that some of the things that we talk about, we do have a difference opinion with our white leftist commentators, such as Black issues, because as Black people, we have that lived experience and they don't. And one of the things that was discussed on the interview that I did with Nico is that it's kind of the feeling that, like, they don't want you to come on because they don't want you to prove them wrong. This is a topic that we have great experience with, that we know a lot about because we have lived experience. And God forbid they bring us on and we tell them that they're wrong, and we're able to do so because we have the experience. So that's a big part of it too. But there definitely is a divide. And we have noticed it, that like Black leftists, white leftists in this space, we just don't have the diversity that we should have. And we definitely need more Black females. I mean, if you notice, who is it? You see me and you see Gloria from Slow News Day. You see Brianna Joy Gray, who already had a large platform herself because she was a part of the Bernie campaign. But other than that, who else do you see? So it's something that we've noticed for a long time. And that's part of the reason why we're in this space, to fill that void.
100%. And to build off of that kind of general dynamic, I suppose, you also put a video out recently, which I thought was really fantastic. You talked about how some white commentators have weighed in on using the N-word, and it just seems totally inappropriate for, a community of people who has no lived experience with this stuff to be weighing in on that particular issue. And you also, you kind of pointed out that the Black community's position on this is also not monolithic, which I think is, a lot of times the white community or progressive commentators, even lefties who are white, will sort of project the Black community as having a monolithic position on whatever the topic may be. So can you just speak a little bit about that and how inappropriate it is for certain people to be weighing in on topics like that?
Yes. So I think the common belief is that all Black people use that word. We don't. I don't use that word. My parents didn't use that word. So it's really upsetting when I hear white leftist commentators say, oh, it's okay if you use it with the A at the end instead of an ER. No. Again, this is why it's important that you listen to Black leftist commentators, because, again, we do have a lived experience. But also, one of the things that I want to mention is that when it comes to that word, You have to think about where that word comes from and the meaning behind it. And some people have already contacted me and they said, well, rappers say it, so I can say it too. No, you can skip over that word. And it was really interesting to me how many people were just so destined to use that word. They were like, what if I use it like this? Or what if I use it like that? And I was just floored by this. It was almost as if white people wanted to tell me, no, you can't tell me what I can't do, or you can't tell me I can't do something. And I think for the most part, a lot of white people aren't used to that. They're not used to, especially someone who is of a different race, telling them what they can and cannot do. But Black people, we've been used to that all of our lives. We've heard that our whole lives. So what was really scary to me is the fact that people who have these large platforms, you have like hundreds and thousands of subscribers or million subscribers, and you are going onto your show and you are telling your audience, which is largely a white audience, that it's okay to use that word because it ends in an A. That is very problematic, because you are telling hundreds and thousands of people that it's okay to use that word. I have a challenge for you. Go to neighborhoods like East Baltimore, go to Camden, New Jersey, go to Philly, go to Black neighborhoods in those cities and use that word and see what happens.
Yeah, I wish I could give credit. I saw someone tweet out, why don't you go down to your local barbershop and see if there's a difference between the A and the ER? I don't think there's going to be much of a difference.
No. Oh my God, no.
Yeah. So to transition into, I wanted to talk about sort of the justice system and police brutality and things with you. You've had a lot of great work on that recently. And I know the story is a little bit old, but I think it's going to be such a historical kind of marker on this issue that I wanted to get your thoughts on the George Floyd story. And while I want to be clear, I think it's like a conviction was a positive outcome in a vacuum. I'm not saying I didn't want a conviction, okay? But I take a little bit of issue with some of the way that was maybe messaged or portrayed or framed, where police were all too eager to sort of cast Chauvin out as though he was not part of them. He was sort of his own actor, right? Like an independent, he's not us. We don't do that. Well, he had like a dozen complaints. He'd been promoted after said complaints. He'd been involved in numerous deaths. He'd been involved in numerous shootings. So if the department's response to all that is to make him a training officer and give him more authority in the field, then that very much is a police problem, not a Derek Chauvin problem. And I felt like it was maybe portrayed because all these cops came out and testified against him, which again, I grant is like, you could say a positive step in a sense that the police were willing to break that thin blue line that they usually stand behind. But again, the way it was framed to the general public, it makes it seem as though that's not us. That's the exception to the rule. Can you speak a little bit to how we need to ensure that we're not allowing that kind of messaging to stick?
Yes, it's definitely not it's not the exception to the rule. It's the entire justice system. And the reason why I say that is because we have a problem in this country where police officers get qualified immunity. Now, I want you to think about the job that you currently have. What if you had qualified immunity at work? Would you all of the time, 100% do the right thing if you knew that you wouldn't get in trouble and you can get away with it? So that's a big part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that when I interviewed George Floyd's uncle, one of the things that he said to me is that I'm not mad at the officer. I'm mad at the system. It is the whole structure of the policing system in this country. You have to think back to where did policing come from? Because we didn't always have police. Policing in the very beginning started because of slave patrols to capture slaves. And this is part of the reason why police officers till this day still treat Black people differently when they arrest them versus white people. Look at the way that Derek Chauvin treated George Floyd. Again, this was all over a counterfeit bill. Okay. Look at the way that he treated him versus the way police officers treated Dylan Roof, who walked into a church and shot and killed Black people. Dylan Roof was handcuffed, arrested, and then they took him to get food. And look at the way that they treated George Floyd. And George Floyd, he's one of the incidents, but there are many more that people don't even get to hear about because it's not on mainstream media. And that is very troubling. And I think that if you have not been into like Black communities or lived in some of these communities, and you don't see that and you don't have that lived experience, it's easy to look at George Floyd and think this was a one-off, but it's not. And for people who live in these communities, they see this happen on a daily basis, the way that police officers treat Black people when they come into their communities. So I've lived in both. I've lived in communities that were all Black. I've lived in communities that were predominantly white, and I've lived in communities that are diverse. And one of the things that I can tell you is that police officers behave very differently when they go into an all Black neighborhood.
Yeah. And even the situation, like, I think the Floyd thing caught a lot of attention because of the details that it was the video made it so egregious, right? Where you can't even argue, well, he was pulling something out of his pocket, or like what you can't even make these disingenuous arguments when you watch that video. But I think it's worth pointing out, I've seen at least half a dozen other cases in the last just handful of years where people were handcuffed and proned out and knelt on for minutes at a time. I believe I might have the guy's name wrong. There's so many now that I can't even keep, but was it Oscar Grant? Was that his name that was shot in the back while he was proned out? I mean, so like, can you talk a little bit about how I think technology has given us more of an insight into this? Imagine if no one had a phone to sit there and film George Floyd. We'd never even know. The police report said he died from, he had a medical emergency while in custody or something to that effect. So we never would have known. We just would have thought, oh, this guy had a heart attack while he was, handcuffed or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about how we're pulling the curtain back with technology and how this kind of conduct, even as egregious as George Floyd's situation, is not uncommon and is actually somewhat common practice within law enforcement?
Exactly. I think Will Smith said it best when he said that racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed. And that's the thing I want people to understand. For Black people, this type of behavior for us is not unusual. We are used to being treated this way. I'm glad that you brought up Oscar Grant, because that one is very significant, because a lot of people don't know about what happened to Oscar Grant. It's been a while since this has happened. There was a movie made about it called Fruitvale Station, which I encourage everyone to watch, with Michael B. Jordan. Oscar Grant was handcuffed on the ground, laying on his stomach. And Oscar Grant was shot in the back by a police officer. That police officer was arrested. He was convicted. That police officer only served 1 year. And Oscar Grant doesn't get to come back. And this is what I want people to know, is that if we did not have people filming these incidents, we would just go by the headline that the newspaper says or that mainstream media says, and we wouldn't really know the full scope of what happened. And so I do encourage people, if you're around and these incidents happen, pull out your phone, definitely take a video, because when we think about police reform, and this is why I'm not for police reform, and I'll tell you in just a second, body cams were a part of police reform. Body cams have not prevented police officers from killing unarmed Black people.
Yeah.
Police officers have also been known to turn them off. So when people say we need police reform, we need to reform them. No, we've already done this. We have already taken these steps. What we need to do is we need to defund the police. The police departments are heavily funded. Take that money, put it back into Black and brown communities, and eventually we need to abolish the police. And by that, I mean, we need to tear the system that is currently in place down, and we need to rebuild a new one, because body cams aren't working. Police reform is not working, and police officers will continue to do what they are doing until we make bold, progressive change.
100%. And I think it's worth noting that in a broad statistical sense, communities that have more police do not have less crime. The communities that have less crime are the communities that have more resources put into social programs where people are not so desperate and impoverished. So if you actually are concerned about crime, and no one thinks we can totally get rid of crime, but if you actually want to take an effective step forward on minimizing the violence in our society, you should be funding social programs, housing, healthcare, education, etc. And that money is currently, as you pointed out, going from local jurisdictions to police instead. So I think that's, it's that Oscar Grant's murderer got 1 year. People get longer terms for misdemeanors and for, that is just beyond outrageous. I did not know that piece of this. So I wanted to show a clip here. I'm sure that you have seen this clip, but this was a cop running a pregnant woman off the road, flipping her car over. This was from about a year ago, but it has recently come out. She had her hazards on, which is by the book what you're supposed to do when you're like looking for a place to pull over. That's telling the officer, I'm looking for a safe place to pull over, but I'm on the freeway and I'm not going to do it right now, right? And this was his response. So we'll watch this video and then come back, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
July 2020, Nicole Harper was driving home on the I-67 and is alleged to have been clocked for speeding by Senior Corporal Rodney Dunn, who claims that she fled. But in the video, we see an obvious decrease in speed as Harper pulls into the right lane and activates her turn signal. She claims it was to indicate she was going to exit the interstate, as the area had a reduced shoulder, regardless of Harper's actions and indications that she would stop. Corporal Dunn initiates a pit maneuver.
Roll over, get me EMS started. Got the number 3 lane shut down.
So I just want to make one very quick point. First of all, notice how calm he is. He's not even like, he doesn't seem upset by what has just happened. Or, I think if any of us like accidentally ran a car off the road when we thought they were fleeing, we'd be like, oh my God, holy shit, what did I just do? But he's just calmly, oh yeah, get the EMS or car flip. We're going to close the third lane. And the second point, this is kind of how I wanted to ask you about this incident. Oftentimes, the escalation prior to the actual violence leads to the situation. With George Floyd, it was, hey, he's got a counterfeit $20 bill. That leads to his murder. With her, it's she was speeding. So even if you think she's running away, why not let her? Why are you creating this hyper dangerous situation by chasing her and pit maneuvering her? What if there was another car on the road that you just sent her flying into and you kill a kid or something? I mean, so can you talk a little bit about how the whole process ends up leading to, and these violent situations that are totally unnecessary?
Yes, absolutely. So as a police officer, you're supposed to de-escalate the situation. You're not supposed to escalate the situation. What oftentimes we see happen here in the US is that police officers arrive to the scene and they actually make the situation worse than it already was. And that can cause the person that is, I guess, what they would consider the suspect or criminal or whatever, that can cause them to react. It's easy to tell people not to react, but when you're in that moment, that's not your first thought. Your first thought is, whoa, what's going on? Like, to react. And I can talk about this from a different perspective as well. Having lived in Europe, when I lived in Germany, police officers did not behave this way. When they would show up to a scene, they would actually de-escalate the situation. They wouldn't escalate it. And there's video footage of a man who was waving a knife at police officers. And this was in Europe as well. And police officers, they de-escalated the situation, got the man to put the knife down. Whereas in this country, if that was a black person doing that, it's like their first response is to shoot to kill instead of de-escalating the situation. So they just make things worse.
Yeah, one of my regular guests is he's a union lawyer who lived in Australia for a while. And when we were talking about the, again, I'm going to blank on her name, something Bryant. She was defending herself from her attackers. She was like 17 years old, and she gets shot and killed, right? And he pointed out that in a place like Australia, it wouldn't even, like, the debate of should he have shot her would not even be, like, that wouldn't even be a thought, let alone a position that half the country was taking. You know what I mean? He's like, in other countries, they would have dived and tackled her and gotten the knife out of her hand and then proceeded with the situation. They would not have pulled a weapon, you know. So there's this mentality of violence from the police. There's this institutionally taught violence that your first priority is to go home safe, not to sacrifice yourself for the society, which is what we're all asked to, like, respect in the officer, right? So there's this, to me, it's a brazen hypocrisy where we're asked to respect that they're putting their lives on the line, but then they're trained not to put their life on the line, you know? So I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Ma'Khia Bryant situation, I remember watching that video and thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, his first response was to shoot to kill, because he didn't just shoot her. He shot her to kill her. And this is another situation where, had this happened in another country, like Luke was saying, they would have handled this very differently. I also want to remind people that Ma'Khia Bryant was the one who called the police. And I do understand where people are coming from. They're like, when the police officer showed up, he doesn't know who's who. He doesn't understand, like, what happened. But police officers also have a taser. He could have used his taser, but no, his first response was to shoot, and to shoot to kill. He didn't just, like, shoot her and say, oh, I'm just going to shoot her in the leg, which would have made her fall. I'm going to shoot to kill her. That was his first response.
Yeah. Or I'm going to shoot her arm that's holding the knife, or none of that. I'm going to taser. I'm going to pepper spray her. I'm going to use the baton. None of that. Not even a thought, right? And these cops are often in body armor. They even could just dive and tackle her, and they're protected over most of their body if she has it. Like, so in every way, it's an escalation of the problem. I wanted to show another story that I have here. Oh, did I screw up my screen share? I am sorry, guys. I'm kind of new to StreamYard. Give me a sec. Here we go. So this is a tweet from AJ Plus. They reported this maybe a week ago. A Texas woman was sentenced to 40 months in prison for making false 911 calls that her neighbors were drug dealers, sparking a drug raid that killed 2 people. 2 officers face murder charges, one of whom allegedly bought heroin to frame the couple and then lied to obtain a warrant. So this kind of comes back to some of the race stuff that we were talking about earlier. I don't know if that applies to this situation, but there's this whole, the Karens of the world, right, that call the cops on black people no matter what, and kind of instigate a situation, even if they are genuinely in their intent well-meaning and thinking that they're trying to stop a bad situation or a violent situation. There's this sort of deeply instilled tendency to behave in a racist manner in that particular moment. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of the sociology that goes into that, and how much of a problem it is to have a society that is constantly fearing black people? Because that really is racism's fear, right? It's an incoherent fear that I'm going to then, you know, behave upon. So then I'm going to call the police because I fear, because I'm scared, because the color of your skin makes me think you must be up to no good, right? Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
Absolutely. That's why oftentimes when a white person may call the police on a black person, sometimes for little things, like there's a black person that looks suspicious that's in my neighborhood. Notice how they'll always mention that the person is black, right? So what that says is that white people in this country know that the police system in this country is inherently racist. And another example I want to use for that is the woman who called the police officer on the bird watcher in Central Park. I forget her name. Amy Cooper? I think it's Amy Cooper. She called the police officer on the bird watcher. Notice in the video, she said, I'm going to call the police and tell them there is a black male. So why is that important? That's important because Amy Cooper was letting you know that even she knew that the police system in this country is racist. So she knew that she could make that call, and she knew the police would come and do something about it.
Yeah. Notice that her comment is not, I'm going to call the police and report a crime. I'm going to call the police and report what you're doing. No, it's I'm going to call the police and report a black man. That says, and she apparently also was like donated to like Democrats and was considered herself liberal. And, I think that kind of pulled the mask on some of the, people who may actually really not think they're racist that are consistently behaving in racist ways. Amy Cooper was absolutely horrendous. And that goes back to, as you were saying, the root of police in this country, which has always been to target the black community and the indigenous community and other marginalized communities, but particularly because they're born out of slave catchers, the black community. So then to add to this, as we get into the justice system stuff, you can also go find statistics that at every other step of this process, even if you escape the police violence and you're just arrested, then we see statistics that the black community, the indigenous community are treated very differently. The poor community, right? Any marginalized community is going to be treated very differently by our justice system than say a wealthy white guy, right, is going to be treated, or a Dylan Roof or these. So once you're charged, you end up then getting longer sentences, bigger fines, harder time getting good representation, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about the systemic racism of the entire system?
Absolutely. So one of the things to think about is that oftentimes conservatives will say, well, they shouldn't have done the crime.
Mm-hmm.
I get that, but that still doesn't explain why a black person and a white person can do the same crime and the black person can get more time. And this is what happens when you end up in the justice system. Now you have a record. You have a criminal record. Even once you're released from prison, it is going to be very difficult for you to get a job. So now you're back out in the community and you're trying to do things the right way and you're trying to get a job, but nobody will hire you because you have a record, especially if you're a black person that has a record. So what happens? That person ends up doing crime just so that they can live, so that they can have money, so that they can eat. This is how a lot of times people who are drug dealers, when they get out of prison, they go back to selling drugs because they can't get a job, a regular job, right? So they go back into that crime so that they can make money, so that they can put food on the table, so that they have a roof over their head. And this is why I tell people a lot of crime is poverty related.
Yeah.
So we have to fix that system in this country. Like if people are feeling that they need to do these things in order just to like have money so that they can buy food, then that tells you that the US, even though it's the wealthiest country in the world, we have a serious wealth problem in this country. Nobody should have to resort to that to do it. And I've seen it. I've seen kids in grocery stores stealing groceries. Am I going to say, hey, that kid over there is taking food? No. If somebody's in the grocery store and they're stealing food, they don't have food. They don't have money to have food. And that's the thing about poverty, like in this country. But yeah, once you have a record, it is really difficult to turn your life around, especially if you are Black.
Yeah, and there's other systemic racism there at play too. I saw one study where they filled out job applications and sent them to various employers, and one of the names would be a very like plain typical white person name, and the other name would be an ethnic name. And what ended up happening is you got very different results. I think it was like, you know, the ethnic names got like 2/3 the calls or something. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was very clear discrimination, even though the resume was identical, right? So there was no, this person has a better education or more experience. It was based purely on the name that was on, right? So there's other systemic racist elements at play there. But you really hit on what I think is the solution. So can you, obviously we'd love to politically defund police and cut into their power, and we'd love to get rid of qualified immunity, and those are political fights that we all should be engaged in. But can you talk about at the community level how we could actually cut into the crime at its root and also uplift the communities that are victimized by these oppressive systems with housing, with education, by making sure people aren't food insecure and these kinds of things?
Yeah. So one of the things that Rome, who's a part of Fred Hampton Leftists as well, is doing, he's traveling across this country doing mutual aid. That is something that will really help communities. And it's things like, you know, buying clothes and donating clothes to people, getting food and donating food to communities as well. Mutual aid really helps a lot. The more people that we can get involved with those types of things, the better off the poverty situation will be. But at the end of the day, a big part of it is the minimum wage and livable wage in this country. I mean, people can't live off of $7.50 an hour. We've seen this regardless of what state you live in. And yet we have people in office who don't want people to have a $15 minimum wage, which it actually should be higher than that if we're talking about inflation in this country. And so you will have people that will combat this. I've seen a conservative say this on Fox News as well, that minimum wage jobs are not meant for adults. They're meant for teenagers. Okay. But when teenagers have to go to school between like 8 a.m., 3 p.m., however long your school day is, who is going to work at those restaurants and those retailers during those hours while the kids are in school?
Yeah.
So this is where, like, when you see these things like on mainstream media, this is where you need to call this out, because that statement that she made didn't make any sense and nobody called it out on that platform. And I was just like, really? Does nobody see what's wrong with her statement? So that just doesn't make any sense. So obviously there are people in this country that are going to have to work those jobs that are adults, and paying someone $7.50 an hour, they know like that's not enough to cover people's rent. So then what happens is that person ends up doing two jobs. And I've seen people do that before. When I lived in New York, I saw people working 2 and 3 jobs. And like, that was just to get by. That was just to get by. So you're working like all the time. If you're constantly working like that, then that also will affect your health. And that's why people that live in some of these impoverished communities, oftentimes they are more likely to have health decline sooner than people who live in wealthier communities.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And just to touch on that, you pointed out the argument that it's kids that are working these jobs. Who cares? What a weird thing to basically say. I'm in favor of child slavery. I think kids should be worked to death. Like what a weird position to take on the surface. But then when you get into it logistically, like you said, it doesn't even make sense. A lot of when do you go to fast food? On your lunch break at work. Where are the kids when you're on your lunch break at work? They're in school. You think they're going to be? It's an insane argument on the surface. But I think it's important to note some of the intersectionality between social issues and economic issues here. And this is where I think economic issues sometimes don't get enough play. And this is at Real Progressives, we really like to focus on the socioeconomics, because when you look at like a minimum wage, 59% of minimum wage workers are women, disproportionately marginalized communities, et cetera. So when we talk about uplifting communities who have been marginalized throughout the history of this country, one of the critical ways that we can do that is through these socioeconomic policies, right? Who's more victimized by our housing system than the marginalized communities, than women, et cetera. So when we talk about social issues, I think we need to tie in the economics there and make sure that people understand that economics are one of the strongest vehicles by which that oppression is kind of executed. So can you talk a little bit about that and how, like, what steps do you think we can take here politically to try to cut into these problems?
I think one of the things is, we have a wealth problem in this country, that is for sure. But one of the things is reparations. And this is something that I've seen Democrats push back on, but I've also seen progressive and leftist commentators push back on this as well. Listen, there is a huge wealth gap between Black people and white people in this country. That didn't happen overnight. That is because of slavery. That is because Black people were not given the promise that they were told they were going to get by General Sherman, which was 40 acres and a mule. So Black people automatically were at a disadvantage when it came to land and home ownership, right? So one of the biggest things for net worth is home ownership. We know that now, like in this country, Black people, we are not on that level in terms of home ownership. Yes, Black people do own homes, but we are nowhere near where we should be in reference to when you compare us to our white counterparts. Now, some of that has to do with racism in real estate, and that does happen. And I've gone through the home buying process myself. It is a thing. But some of that has to do with not having that generational wealth to pass down. So if Black people would have had 40 acres and a mule, we would have already had land and home ownership, and we would have been able to pass that down to our kids, grandkids, and we would have had generational wealth. So that is a big part of it. So when people say that they're against reparations, but they want to close the racial wealth gap, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's saying I want to win the game, but I don't want to do the work to win the game. Like the reparations is the tool to achieve some form of equitability between the two communities. Just to pull a quick statistic up, this is from 2017. More than half of white families end up with more wealth than their parents, while only 23% of blacks are able to do the same. So that's an indication of the kind of the combination of all the things that you were talking about. Is at the end of your life, how much do you have to pass down to your kids, right? And if over and over again one side is drastically outperforming the other in this particular area, you're going to have this disparity in the numbers. And you know that's a tremendous problem. And we talk about like the inheritance taxes and these kinds of things that ends up being a racial issue. And I think sometimes that maybe doesn't get enough play, reparations as well. So how can we, like, as you know, I'm as privileged as you can be in this country. I'm a white man. How can I help these kinds of efforts? How can we make sure that we're elevating the right narratives and platforming the right people and working towards, you know, helping the communities that are most marginalized in our country?
There's a couple of things. Like, one, we have to do away with the wage disparities and wage discrimination that we have in this country. I mean, I'm Black, but I'm also a female, so I got a double whammy here. And the thing is that oftentimes Black people, when we get a job, we're offered less than what our white counterparts are offered. So we're already starting lower than we should. So the wage disparities is a big problem. When you're giving someone an offer, everybody should get the same offer across the board. If you had 3 candidates that interview for a job and they have the same level of experience, why are you going to offer the white guy who interviewed for the job $80,000, but you're going to offer the Black woman who interviewed for the job $55,000? And I say this because I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen time and time again. That doesn't make any sense. Give the same offer that you would to the white guy, give that same offer to the Black female. And I want to tell you something that came out recently about Boston, which is where I live. A couple years ago, the Boston Globe did a study about race in Boston. What they found during that study is that white people in Boston had a net worth of $250,000 and Black people had a net worth of $8. Now, a lot of people, when they heard that story, they were like, oh my God, like, how could that be? But as a Black person, I was like, why are you surprised? Look around. How many Black people here in Eastern Massachusetts are homeowners? Do you see how much houses cost here? Houses are ridiculously priced here. And then what are they paid compared to their white counterparts for the same job at the same company when they have the same years of experience? What's the pay gap there? So that is a huge disparity. And we have a lot of wealth disparities here in Massachusetts, but that needs to be fixed. And the way to fix that is you're going to have to, like, when giving people employment offers, you need to offer people that have the same experience, that have the same qualifications. You need to give them the same offer. Now, one thing that Massachusetts has done recently that I think is a good thing, they stopped employers from asking applicants what their current salary is. That's a big one, because I've said this, and I really say this a lot to women. If you start off low, it is so much harder to get higher pay. It takes you longer because they were using that. They were using that as leverage. What is your current salary? Oh, your current salary is only $50,000. Okay, I'm only going to offer you this. So I'm glad that Massachusetts did away with that. I think every state should do away with that. But I think a big part of it is, like, you just have to get involved in communities. And people always say that there are 2 Bostons. They say that there's Boston for Black people and there's Boston for white people. And you can really see how segregated it is here, although things have improved over the past couple of years. But you see it. If you go from Back Bay to Roxbury to Dorchester, you see the difference and you see the disparities. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are making it easier for Black people to own homes. And if that means, like, implementing more like first-time home buyer workshops, helping them with the tools that they need to be able to get home ownership. But also, credit is a big factor. And it's one of the things that holds a lot of people back, and not just Black people. Credit holds a lot of people back from getting home ownership. And so we're going to have to do something with that. And then also, we need to get rid of some of these racist policies where if a Black person goes to buy a car and a white person goes to buy the same car and they have the same credit, the Black person has to pay a higher interest.
Yep. Yeah. And, to touch on Boston's supposed to be, and in many ways is, a very progressive city by, comparison to other places. But I'm just as one specific example, I'm a total sports nerd. And one thing that comes up a few times every year is Black baseball players saying, when I go to Fenway, I get racial slurs yelled at me, and that's to speak to what you're saying. It's like, that's supposed to be a progressive lefty city. Why is it that the city specifically is where you're getting this particular rhetoric? I'm from the Seattle area and kind of, also supposedly very progressive city, leftist leaning city. But to tell a quick story, I was in high school. I worked at the drive-thru in Jack in the Box part-time, right? Just a part-time job. And at the turn of the new year, we had passed a minimum wage increase in the state. I got on my first check that minimum wage increase, but every Hispanic worker did not. And they went to my general manager and they said, hey, what is up with this? We were supposed to get a raise of whatever it was, 50 or 60 cents an hour starting at the beginning of the new year. And he said, I will try to go to bat for you, but I have a feeling that they're going to tell me, okay, tell them to sue us. Because they don't have Social Security number, they can't go, right? So there's this very built-in and intentional, right? I was some 16-year-old shithead working the drive-thru and I got my raise, but the people who were there to earn their living and to pay for their kids and their housing, they didn't get their raise, right? So there's a very systemic nature to that. And I think that's, if you could speak to this for a bit, it's kind of touching on what you were saying earlier. I think it's very important for people in general to know what their coworkers are making. Because if a boss can, even if you take like all the social elements out of it, if a boss can get away with paying someone less to do the same job, they're going to do it as many times as they possibly can. So if you have one or two people in a company that know their worth and fight for their worth and force the boss to pay them more, everyone else should know that, because otherwise they don't have the opportunity to go fight for what they're worth, and they might be more likely to fold and just kind of accept the lower wage. So can you talk a little bit about how important it is for us to organize as a working class in general and make sure that we're all uplifting each other with information and things like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that sometimes supervisors may do is they'll tell you don't disclose your salary with your coworkers. There's a reason for that. They don't want you guys to get together and have this discussion, because then you'll see that some people may be paid more and don't deserve to be paid more. They'll see that you're all not, or you'll see that all of us are not on an equal playing field, even though they say that we are. Squash that. Definitely have those conversations with your coworkers, because what you'll find oftentimes is that men are most likely paid more. Mm-hmm. You might find that, like Luke was saying, when it comes time for raises or salary increases, some people are offered it and some people are not. And oftentimes the people who are not offered the increase or are offered less of a raise do more work.
Mm-hmm. So that brings up another point, which is that often the hardest workers, in my experience, not that it's like easy to run a big company or whatever. I think that the lowest wage workers often have the hardest work. I've worked in restaurants and it's like the dishwasher gets paid the least and they also get hammered when we get busy. You know what I mean? So like, I think often, I apologize for my camera app there. I think that there's a very direct correlation between how hard you're working and how much you're paid, but it's the reverse of what we think in many cases. Can you talk about how untrue the whole meritocratic argument is that somehow we earn our wage by how hard we work, and those kinds of nonsensical ideas?
Absolutely. When I was in undergrad, I actually worked at a restaurant. A lot of us did, like during that time. And people think that sometimes if you're waiting tables, that all you do is take someone's order and bring out their food. No. It was really hard work, you guys. Like, especially on days when you had to open and you closed the night before. By the time like all of the customers are gone, like sometimes we would be there till like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, like closing. There's so many duties that you have to do in the back of the house that people in the front of the house don't see. So it's a lot of work, like carrying those heavy trays. And then as a server, I was 100% relying on my tips. And back then, I don't know if it's still the same way now, in South Carolina, but back then I was making $2.13 an hour, which as a server, once you make your tips, we weren't getting a paycheck. Like our paycheck would just say void. So you rely heavily on those tips. And you can give 100%, great service to a table, and they may still choose like not to tip you the percentage that you're supposed to tip someone, right? Another thing that I noticed, and this is where the wage thing is actually reversed when it comes to women and men. When I was waiting tables, one of the things I noticed is that for whatever reason, people were tipping us women more, especially if we got a table that was all male. That was something I noticed. I don't know why that is, but we noticed that. We also noticed that there were racial differences with that white servers got higher tips than Black servers did and can do the same job. But those jobs, like people who are working at places like Wendy's, McDonald's, like particularly the restaurant industry, because that's what I did when I was in school. But it's a lot of work, you guys. Like you don't understand it until you have to do that job.
Yeah, and it translates to other industries too. I'd use the Amazon example where workers, they have a serious problem with workplace injuries. There are more like, seriously, you wouldn't believe how often suicides happen in the warehouse and they have to like call. I mean, this has been well documented. Amazon's workers are treated like dirt, but they're also paid like dirt, right? They try to pretend that they pay well because they start at 15. Well, a lot of people who work in warehouses around the country are making low to mid 20s. So when you go in there and pay them 15, you're actually lowering the wage, right? So it's kind of an example very similar to the food service there. So the last thing I wanted to ask is just where can people find your work? Can you talk a little bit about Fred Hampton Leftists and what you guys are aiming to do? I think it's a fantastic group, and where can people find some of your work and follow you on social media and those kind of things?
Definitely. So you can find my channel on YouTube. It's Sabby Sabs. You can also find me on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Substack. And for Fred Hampton Leftists, you can also find us on YouTube. What we are aiming to do with that group is we are giving leftist political commentary from a Black leftist perspective. So when you watch our shows, you'll see us talk about like Joe Biden and all of those players in the field right now politically, but you'll also hear us tell you about how this affects like the Black community and our experiences with this as Black leftists as well. And you're not going to get that everywhere. We are, real, we're authentic, we're raw. We just tell it like it is. And we are trying to get people to, create a movement in this country that does not rely on electoral politics. And this is very important. Some of us have been very disappointed by the squad. And I think it's just a perfect example. Like we had grassroots candidates, they were going to go to Congress and they were really going to fight for us. And they end up being like establishment Democrats. We just can't rely on that anymore. So we're relying on ourselves and people, working people, for all of us to come together and do mutual aid throughout this country and provide a political perspective that is going to bring people together, not so much based on right and left, but more so based on getting these policies passed that we really want to get passed, helping people that need help, whether it's clothing, whether it's food, and addressing a lot of the racial issues that we have in this country that we just feel that Congress and Senate, they're just not doing it, whether it's Biden administration or Trump's administration. So we're not relying on electoral politics. We will call them out, but we're relying on ourselves. We're relying on the people to make change in this country.
Absolutely fantastic. I encourage everybody to go look at follow Sabrina's work and Fred Hampton Leftists as in general. And a quick plug, our co-editor Jabari Morris went on with RJ, and that was a fantastic bit maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. The time kind of gets all blurry. But anyway, I want to very much thank you for taking the time today, Sabrina. I hope that we can do this again sometime. It was great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me on, Luke.
All righty. So I have a handful more stories. This is going to be a little bit longer stream than usual today, guys. I have a handful more stories that I want to get into here. And all of them are fairly important. So first of all here, this is a tweet thread describing a story going on with BlackRock. For those that don't know, BlackRock is a gigantic financial asset company. They involved in all sorts of stuff. This is from Cultural Husbandry. They say BlackRock is buying every single family house they can find, paying 20 to 50% above asking price and outbidding normal home buyers. Why are corporations, pension funds, and property investment groups buying entire neighborhoods out from under the middle class? Let's take a look. Homes are popping up on MLS and going under that's a real estate service, and going under contract within a few hours. BlackRock, among others, are buying up thousands of new homes and entire neighborhoods. So this is really troubling, you guys, because one of the ways that you can become sort of financially viable is by purchasing property, because you're no longer pissing your rent away every month. You own something, right? And generationally, this has been a struggle for millennials and I get them confused, Gen Xers or Gen Zers, the Zoomers. It's been very difficult for us to be able to afford property. And that leaves us in a position where it's harder to become financially stable. It's harder to get your feet under you. So when big firms are going in and spending 50% above market to buy off entire neighborhoods. There was a neighborhood, I believe it was in Texas, where like 120 some homes that were freshly built were bought up by some investment firm. Again, at above market, it was 30 some million they paid for this neighborhood. So when you have stuff like this happening, it further erodes the ability for middle class and working class people, particularly young people who have just chronologically been more affected by this, to purchase property. And to go back to the discussion I was just having with Sabrina, there's also definitely some racial elements to that and some misogynistic elements to that as well. Marginalized communities have a harder time finding themselves as property owners, right? And if you're systemically economically stuck, both on the employment side and on the housing side and on the social services side and all of these various avenues by which you can try to become financially viable, you end up in a place where you really cannot participate in our society in the way that we all want everybody to be able to participate in our society, right? You end up stuck in struggle. You end up having to overwork yourself just to pay your rent and unable to purchase property. So this is BlackRock here, seeing a financial opportunity for themselves that systemically enhances, I'd even say, the systemic oppression of marginalized and poor and young communities, putting us in an even worse spot. We already have this historic wealth gap, and this will serve to expand it even further. So this is a horrendously concerning story here, that BlackRock and others are buying up housing as quickly as they can. We're on another bubble, you guys. We're looking at another recession at some point. We have not actually solved the roots of the problems that led to 2007 and 2008, and that's a whole different, I could do a multi-hour stream on that alone. But you guys, you understand what I'm saying. We put a Band-Aid on that wasn't even a good Band-Aid, and now we're dealing with the same root causes. So this will lead us to a place where when that crash happens, it's even more devastating for the vulnerable communities, right? So this is horrendous. This needs to be regulated because BlackRock will not stop engaging in this kind of conduct. And, we need to deal with this as a society in legal ways. My next story here, Merrick Garland, who runs Biden's Justice Department, is the Attorney General. He is defending maintaining Trump's policies. Now, there's this kind of tradition that you don't go against the policies of the previous administration in some cases, yada, yada. But for the Democrats to treat Trump like he's the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler throughout the entire campaign and for the last 4 years, and again, it shouldn't need to be said, Trump is absolutely horrendous. This is, but for them to treat him like such an existential threat, treat this like the most important election in the history of the country, and then turn around and allow his immigration executive orders to stand for months after saying you would undo them day one, to turn around and let the Justice Department continue with Trump's policies, most specifically defending Trump himself from sexual assault allegations. It's pretty egregious. It's pretty transparent. It's pretty revealing. So we're going to watch a clip here of Merrick Garland being questioned on this and defending his decision and the Biden administration's decision to uphold Trump's policies, or Trump's Justice Department's policies.
Now, Attorney General, in the past few weeks, your department has endorsed some highly controversial positions taken by the former president's Justice Department. Many have expressed concerns about that. For example, the Trump DOJ removed from the state court to federal court a defamation charge involving an assault allegation against Donald Trump by a woman. The release of the OLC memo on obstruction of justice conclusions and so on. How is this coming about? Are these criticisms valid, or what do you say about them?
Senator, I'm grateful for you asking me the question, and I know about the criticisms. Look, the job of the Justice Department in making decisions of law is not to back any administration, previous or present. Our job is to represent the American people. And our job in doing so is to ensure adherence to the rule of law, which is the fundamental requirement of a democracy or a republic or a representative democracy. And the essence of the rule of law is what I said when I accepted the nomination for Attorney General. It is that like cases be treated alike, that there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, that there not be one rule for friends and another for foes. Now, it is not always easy to apply that rule. Sometimes it means that we have to make a decision about the law that we would never have made and that we strongly disagree with as a matter of policy. But in every case, the job of the Justice Department is to make the best judgment it can as to what the law requires. Now, matters of policy, of course, are completely different, and that explains why we have reversed the policies of the previous administration many times over the last 3 months, and why we have initiated our own policies that are distinctly different from those of the previous administration. But this is an important issue, the distinction between law and policy, and it's at the center of ensuring adherence to the rule of law, for which the Justice Department stands.
Well, as you know, and you and I have had discussions on other matters, I think I've been first to say that there may be areas we agree or disagree with you, but follow the law, and which is basically what I've said to every Attorney General from Republican or Democratic administration since I was here.
So, first of all, what a horrendous job of questioning from Patrick Leahy, that he basically just lets him get away with a non-answer like that. And second of all, I don't know that Merrick Garland realizes that his answer it actually made it worse, because he's basically saying we are not doing this on tradition, which is clearly why they're actually doing it. He's insisting we are taking an objective look at every decision that we make and following the law. Well, then your interpretation of the law is that presidents should not be able to be prosecuted for sexual assault. And if that's your interpretation of the law, Mr. Garland, I don't think you belong in the Attorney General spot. But again, really pathetic job there from Patrick Leahy to just give such softballs, even when he was clearly trying to, in some sense, confront Merrick Garland. It's a sad state of politics that we cannot have these kinds of discussions in an open, honest sense, and that we simply accept deflectory nonsense as an answer for the question that was not even addressed by the Attorney General in that particular instance. I think that's a shameful job by Merrick Garland, who is no progressive. Some of you will remember that McConnell and Republicans successfully obstructed his potential Supreme Court nomination. And or I suppose he was nominated, but they refused to confirm him. They obstructed the process to an extent that Obama's presidency ran out. I'm sure many of you remember this. This is why the court is how it is right now. But Merrick Garland, not exactly like some sort of lefty dream. I mean, the guy's very pro-corporate. He's kind of centrist on a lot of these issues. He clearly cares more about tradition than prosecuting Trump for sexual assault, which is, again, like, take that clip and sort of compare and contrast it to the media environment during the campaign and how they would have responded should Trump's Justice Department have made that exact same argument. If you flip the players and you have a different opinion, you're being a partisan hack. And that's what most of the liberal media has done as it pertains to this particular issue. I wanted to touch a little bit. We talked earlier about Joe Manchin and the conservative Democrats, Cinema Tester, et cetera, who have worked to obstruct even Biden's purported political goals. So even Joe Biden, who's very establishment and very corporate friendly and very much a centrist Democrat, really conservative is the more accurate descriptory term, but even Joe Biden had certain policies that are overwhelmingly popular that he ran on, that he claimed he was going to prioritize and fight for. And Joe Manchin in particular has pretty proudly stood in the way of that and fetishized the whole bipartisanship and made this about putting him in the spotlight and kind of virtue signaling to his voters. See how like reasonable I am. See how I'm not, party sycophant and yada yada. But it's all very disingenuous, and it's all very much designed to provide cover for other Democrats who are also not so hot on these very popular policy ideas. So I'm going to show you guys two clips here. First one is Jamal Bowman on CNN. This was a rare, fantastic interview on CNN. Jamal Bowman going into why Democrats should not, when they have a majority, negotiate with Republicans or care about how many Republicans are on board for any given policy. This is a few minutes long, but I wanted to show you guys this whole clip because I thought he answered every question spectacularly. This is Jamal Bowman on CNN.
Democratic Congressman Jamal Bowman of New York. And Congressman, I appreciate your time. So Biden tonight, meets with Senator Capito and says no to her latest offer. But he'd already agreed to cut the price tag nearly in half and to drop that corporate tax increase. Do you think he should go back on those terms? Try to push the price tag back up?
So Biden ran on an infrastructure bill that was north of $2 trillion. Yep. Because that was the number, progressives organized across the country to make sure Biden won the election, specifically in Georgia, in Michigan, and places like Pennsylvania. To go from over $2 trillion to $1.7 trillion should never have been done. And to try to cut it further definitely should not be done. We have 100-year-old infrastructure. We have children getting lead poisoning from drinking out of lead pipes. We have public housing that hasn't received any money from the federal government in over 10 years. And when you speak to climate organizers and activists and scholars and infrastructure scholars, they say the number needs to be much higher. This is our New Deal moment. We have just lost over 600,000 people due to COVID in 1 year. We lost that many people in the Civil War over 4 years. What was our response? It was the Homestead Act. It was the Industrial Revolution. We invested in bringing the American economy back. We need to do the same thing now, beginning with the working people in our most marginalized communities.
So, okay, so I understand where you stand on this, but the thing about Biden is, even though he said no to the latest GOP proposal tonight, after speaking with the lead Republican negotiator, he is going to speak to Senator Capito again on Monday. So should he even be doing that? I mean, I understand there's lots of ways to look at this, but I can look at it and say, going from 1.7 trillion to 1 trillion, when the other side goes from 250 billion to 300 billion, one side's moving a lot more than the other, and the two sides are still really far apart.
So I question why we're even deciding to negotiate with the Republicans. Republicans have not tried to negotiate with us in good faith since Biden has been in the White House. They pushed the big lie, which led to the insurrection. They voted to overturn the election results. It did not support an impeachment, even though Donald Trump was clearly at fault there. I understand, wanting to engage in bipartisanship, but they have not negotiated with us and tried to engage with us in good faith since this session has begun. We can use reconciliation to get this done. We have enough Democratic votes, and we need to do so because the American people sent us there to deliver. And as Democrats, we have to deliver. That is how we win the midterms next year, not negotiating with Republicans who do not want to negotiate in good faith.
Okay, so I understand your point on Republicans, but a big part of why Biden is in this position is because of Democrats, right? Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Manchin has been insistent on bipartisanship. He just spoke to our own Manu Raju and said he's not going to do this alone. He's not going to do this just Democrats. Here's what he said.
We've got to work together, and that takes a lot of time and energy and patience. You can only do so much by yourself.
I mean, Senator Manchin is refusing to support a party line vote in the Senate. So even if you were to go that route, this bill cannot become law without him. So what do you say to Senator Manchin?
Senator Manchin has to realize, yes, he represents West Virginia, but he represents the American people. And the policies that progressives are pushing for are policies that are popular with the American people. Lowering drug prices, investing in the care economy, rebuilding our crumbling school infrastructure. We introduced the Care for All agenda, which is a resolution that centers care as the rebirth of our economy. That is very popular amongst the American people. So is investing in our school infrastructure. So is lowering drug prices. I encourage Senator Manchin to look at what's been happening with water quality in West Virginia for many years, what's happening with poverty in West Virginia for many years, but also what's happening with the American people overall. This is our moment. History is going to tell this story, and it's going to tell a story of us either responding to the needs of the majority of the American people or responding to large corporations and the wealthy elite. It's time for us to build an economy that works as a multiracial democracy, not to do business as usual in the way that we claim is responsible governance, but it hasn't met the mark of those who are marginalized, which is the majority of the American people.
All right, Congressman, thank you very much. I appreciate your time tonight.
So I thought that was really fantastic job there from Jamal Bowman, who, and I know I keep kind of trying to walk this line, but it's as disappointed as I am with a lot of progressives a lot of the time, I think Jamal is one of the better ones. He is outspoken in some of these situations, and you could see that the host there seemed somewhat uncomfortable when he started to mention, like, we don't need Republicans. We should go through reconciliation. We have both the Senate and the House, and we have the White House, and there's no need to negotiate with Republicans here and put on this bipartisan pony show. When he kind of went down that path, you saw her start to say, oh, okay. Like, let me get to my next question, because I don't want you. It's not a comfortable narrative for these corporate sources, for CNN, for cable news, for the legacy media. So Jamal Bowman there doing a really great job of pointing out that Joe Manchin, and he's making the key point, the most effective point. Joe Manchin is opposing popular policy. Okay. A lot of this stuff doesn't go nearly far enough, and that's my position. But when you have policies that are 65, 70, 75, 80% popular, and you're, opposing them on the grounds of, but I want to be bipartisan, that needs to be pointed out. And Jamal Bowman, they're making a great point too. Like, West Virginia happens to be one of the most severely victimized states from the neoliberal era. They've been left behind, and the coal industry just ravaged the state and the communities in West Virginia. So it's a particularly egregious example because Manchin's own people need the people he represents need these policies more so than even most of the rest of the country needs these policies. And that needs to be pointed out. Jamal Bowman there with a great job of, hey, how's the drinking water in your state, Joe? You know, you're going to sit here and argue we should spend less on infrastructure when your people are not drinking clean water? Like, hello, wake up. You know, Jamal, really, really fantastic job there on CNN. And I wanted to show you guys one more clip. This is an activist in West Virginia. This is Pam Garrison. And she kind of went on a little bit of a tirade against Joe Manchin and said, kind of, we're coming. We're going to march against you, that kind of thing. This is, again, really fantastic clip. This is Pam Garrison.
I've watched my senator talking about compromise. And I wonder, what reality is he in? Does he think, is he that delusional? Or does he think we are that stupid? You got to have somebody to compromise. We've had 13 years of Mitch McConnell saying, no, you can't have a living wage. No, the Grim Reaper I am. Let your bills come here to die. I don't care. And now the senator that I put in there that comes here and says, I can relate to you poor people, and looks down at his nose at me with pompousness and don't hear what I'm saying. Yeah, he'll let me sit there and say what I say and pour my heart out. And you know what? He turns right around and does the very opposite of the things that I'm saying is hurting us and hurting our people. He goes and does. We are coming. We are coming. And I'll tell you what, my fellow Americans are coming with me. We don't need guns. We've got morals. We've got justice and a constitution that they have stomped on. And this is my constitution and my country I'm fighting for. And I want everyone, the news media, every one of my West Virginians, every one of my Americans to know we are in this together, and we're not taking no for an answer, and we're not listening to the lies, the conspiracy theories, and the just downright immoralities anymore. I've got the Lord, and I've got reverence. I've got my people behind me, and we are coming. Poor People's Campaign, we're not political. We're not about different parties. But we are about policies that lift us up and that helps everybody. And how can somebody have that much power in their hands and not use it for good? We can do better. We deserve better.
Absolutely fantastic from Pam right there. I am guilty often of talking about these things in the abstract. And that can make it a little bit too comfortable and analytical of a conversation, because sometimes we need to be reminded what the effect of these decisions and these policies and these positions actually are on everyday real people in West Virginia that have to watch Joe Manchin put on this freaking pony show, go up and do political theater whenever he's got an opportunity to help people. She says, how can you have that kind of power and not help people? She could be in politics. That was a fantastic clip. She should run for office. She should run against him. Okay? Joe Manchin is awful. And I think one of the points here, guys, and I really want to make, I want to drive this point home. I'm not doing this like, look at the big bad Republicans thing. I'm pointing out Republicans are terrible. I'm pointing out that the Democrats are far too willing to use Joe Manchin and the Joe Manchins of the world as an excuse for their own inaction, for their own unwillingness to fight and to prioritize on these again, wildly popular issues. So, and it's worth pointing out that all of these socioeconomic issues, I mean, all of them, money out of politics, raising the minimum wage, single payer healthcare, Green New Deal, federal job guarantee, all of the policies I just listed, you guys, every single one of them top 70% in approval rating. Yet here we are in a democratic republic with people like Joe Manchin supposedly there to execute the will of the people, behaving in the exact opposite manner. So fantastic job from Pam there calling that shit out. Joe Manchin is a horrendous actor, a bad faith actor, a self-interested actor. and someone who, instead of using his power to help people who desperately need that help, he instead uses his power to highlight himself and put a spotlight on himself and engage in political theater that he thinks is going to, apologize for my camera app, that he thinks is going to help him politically down the road, help him keep winning elections, and help him potentially go run for president or whatever the fuck he wants to do. It is all self-interested nonsense. And the Democrats, unfortunately, as an institution, as a party, far too willing to hide behind that. Are there some who call him out? Sure, Jamal Bowman just did a great job calling him out. There's parts of the Democratic Party that do not like Joe Manchin or his position, but all too often, the most powerful Democrats, the leadership, etc., will hide behind Joe and say, well, you know, we really would like to do a $15 minimum wage, but what you gonna do? You know, we'd really love to pass X, Y, or Z, but Joe says no. So what you going to do? It's got to be bipartisan. Republicans won't do it. Well, then you're admitting that you actually don't want the policy either, if you're going to hide behind that and you're not going to fight. So that's my point in talking about Joe Manchin, that he is used as a shield to sort of gatekeep for the establishment, for the corporate friendly, mass of members of Congress. So again, really fantastic job from both Jamal and from Pam there. And I hope that kind of sentiment starts to spread and people start to see Joe Manchin for what he is, and people start to see the Democratic Party establishment for what it is. And I also hope, as disappointed as I've been in the lefties, I hope they step up and take a stronger position here against the Joe Manchins of the world and the Joe Bidens of the world and cinemas, etc. So anyway, enough attention to fucking Joe Manchin. I wanted to talk about Monsanto. I'm sure many of you know Roundup, the weed killer spray that has been causing cancer for decades and that Monsanto still continues to profit off of. I have a clip to show you guys here of Lee Camp covering this. I would have just covered it myself, but Lee is absolutely hilarious and did a great job on this, and I think it's very entertaining and informative. So it's a clip here talking about how Monsanto has lost a lawsuit pertaining to Roundup, but is going to continue to market it anyway, which is the exact kind of rapacious behavior we expect from capitalists.
The Germans saw that there was a chemical killing humans, and they thought, that's awesome! We must buy that company. We want to be in charge of the killing of the people. A $25 million verdict against Monsanto over Roundup herbicide was upheld by a federal court this month. A jury had previously awarded the $25 million to cancer victim Edwin Hardiman, who had worked in the fields with Roundup for 30 years. Roundup, or glyphosate, is a chemical created by three-time winner of world's most evil company, Monsanto. Roundup is used if you want to kill weeds in your fields, or you want to kill, say, your farmhands, or your wife, or your kids, or your pets. Despite how awesome this weed/person killer is, people are suing Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, a German pharmaceutical company, because apparently the Germans saw that there was a chemical killing humans, and they thought, that's awesome! We must buy that company. We want to be in charge of the killing of the peoples. Not some. Oh, Germans, you guys are a hoot. Monsanto has known about the harm of Roundup for a long time now. It's not new. It came out in 2017 that Environmental Protection Agency official Jess Rowland had said on a phone call, if I can kill this EPA investigation, I should get a medal. Rowland said that to a Monsanto regulatory affairs manager. Well, I don't see anything wrong with that. There should be awards and trophies for corruption, don't you think? You know, at least those cheap plastic bowling league kind of trophies. Although this EPA guy would not win the trophy for secrecy at all. Just, hello? Hi! You're gonna bribe me to cancel this EPA investigation. Is that correct? Is that correct? What? I can't hear you. I can't hear you over the sound of our corruption. Point being, a court has ruled Monsanto will indeed have to pay that money. And Bayer is on the hook for billions of dollars in restitution to the victims of Monsanto Roundup. I'll translate for the Bayer representatives. Oh, Scheiße!
hilarious from Lee Camp there. Apologies to the Germans out there, of which I am one. I'm a European mutt, but I am a lot, I'm like 3/8 German or half German or something like that. So I found that hilarious. Apologies to any German who took offense, but I thought Lee Camp was absolutely hilarious in how he portrayed that particular story. But obviously this is critical importance. We see similar stories with Johnson & Johnson's talcum powder. Once the product has been demonstrated to be a serious risk to human health, there's a continued marketing of the product, and there is no institutional authority that steps in and says, no, you cannot sell that product, right? The FDA it's the whole revolving door, and the corruption that we were just seeing an example of between Bayer and Monsanto and regulators, right? So when you have like an EPA and an FDA that are effectively corrupt or bought off or in some way, sort of neutered from doing their job, you end up with an environment where companies like this can just get away with murder, even when that is printed, when journalists are reporting that they're getting away with murder, when the courts find that they're getting away with murder, when they lose cases to people who they have killed or made sick, they still get to market their products and profit off of their products because they have just gotten to be such a large, these various companies, large enough that they have enough influence and enough power over the regulators and over the government bodies that control these things. So Monsanto long been one of the worst companies in the world in terms of their willingness to continually cause illnesses and death, knowingly and willfully and for the sake of pure profit. So just ridiculous story there. And it's a shame that even after decades of us continually finding that this product causes cancer and kills human beings and animals, that we continue to allow it to be used is quite an indictment on our society, on our government, on our regulatory agencies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So shout out to Lee Camp for the coverage there. I thought that was quite fantastic. That is all that I have for you guys today. Big thanks to Sabrina for joining. I thought that was a terrific interview. And thank you guys for sticking around for a few hours here as we did a little bit of a longer stream than usual. I thought some of these stories were quite important and I didn't want to cut them or delay them. So look forward to seeing you all next week. And one more quick plug, go to realprogressives.org. You can find our Patreon there if you want to help us out with our effort for the march. You can also find articles, other podcasts. The Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder Steve is fantastic on Saturday mornings, always talking macroeconomics. We have a number of other shows. Go watch MMT Mondays. Go watch The Up and Up with Jody Newell. Lots of good content if you go to realprogressives.org and make sure that you are getting involved in that march on July 24th if you're interested, or that you tune into our live stream if you cannot participate. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in, and I will see everybody next week.